Okay. Okay. So, welcome everyone. Today I'll go through a very high level overview of the so-called SDG Impact standards. Often there's a lot of focus on the word standard itself, but first and foremost, it should in reality be thought of as a resource guide to help organizations by enabling and facilitating them to embed sustainability into their own decision-making frameworks, to position companies and future proof your businesses, and to make a contribution to operate, helping you to operate more sustainably and to achieve sustainability as a whole. Respond to over a 2 to 3 day for company owners or asset managers. During the first day of the training, we start by going through a few concepts to level set because this is a space, as you might know, where there's a lot of terminology and people use the terms quite differently. So we start with a few definitions in terms of how we use the terms in order to make sure that everyone is on the same page as we go through the training program. Secondly, we will discuss why sustainability and the SDGs are important and the indispensable role played by the private sector. Then we quickly touch upon the business case for sustainability and the SDGs. And finally, we will discuss what are the standards, why are they needed, and how the SDG impact standards can help the company on its sustainability path or accelerate the progress towards the targets. During the second day, we'll do a deep dive into the enterprise standards through the 12 enterprise actions. We will explore examples in practice and discuss ways of building a library of relevant examples and case studies. We will show how to apply the standards and a self assessment tool to a fictional case study, which we will spend time on to show you how the framework works in practice. And on the second day of the course ends by the provision of a comprehensive overview of most of the available tools and resources out there on the marketplace. And during the final day, we'll decide what comes next, and that is the implementation plan. So, in summary, what does it look like to have the standards implemented? So doing this 2 to 3 day training, which will lead to a certification of the participants, will do a deep dive on the business actions and present a case study. The expected results are as follows. So the days 1 and 2 jointly provide the deep understanding of the SDG impact standards. During the third day, we'll spend a little bit time talking about a self-assessment tool developed for the standard, which is a useful tool that organizations can use. And further, we'll talk about what the role of the so-called assurance framework is and the pathway from voluntary adoption and self-assessment to assurance. And the expected result from day 3 are an understanding of assurance, providing tips to deliver and support moving forward. So my name is Christian Kinkombe. I'm the co-founding managing partner of 4IP Group, which has a presence in both Switzerland and in Zambia. And maybe next year, if everything goes well, we'll also have a presence in Congo DRC. I'm also an accredited trainer for the SDG Impact Standards. In fact, I was part of only the second cohort of trained trainers, of which there today still are only 17 trainers operating on the African continent. The SDG Impact is a global initiative of the United Nations Development Programme within its Sustainable Finance Hub, coordinated from the UNDP office in Pretoria in South Africa. It is 100% focused on the private sector to ensure that the private sector's contribution towards the sustainability and the SDGs. It's a recognition that in order to achieve the SDGs, we need the private sector and we need to finance the SDGs. Behind every development activity, there's a need for financing, which this initiative has been brought together to focus on. There are two work streams The first one is the SDG Investor Maps, and the second one is the SDG Impact Standards, which are looking to strengthen impact practices and embed managing for impact into how private sector businesses and investors make their decisions in order to deepen impact. The latter work stream is what I'm going to talk about today. But before I do that, let me just mention the so-called SDG Investor Maps, which basically maps out the investment opportunity areas in the market at the intersection between the SDG needs, the policy priority, and investor interest. As you can see, there are currently 633 investment opportunity areas across the African continent on the platform. But currently, for example, there's no Zambian investment opportunity areas as of now, notwithstanding the recent Zambia Impact Investing Summit. Before I present the SDG Impact Standards, around 2 weeks ago, an announcement, not 2 weeks ago, around 1 month ago, an announcement was made by the co-founder and CEO of the Global Impact Investing Network, Mr. Amit Buri, who unveiled the organization's biannual market sizing estimates on stage of the GIN Impact Forum, which took place in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Based on the GIN's own research, the global impact investing market is now estimated to be around 1.5 trillion US dollars of asset under management. This figure is up by more than 400 billion US dollars from what they estimated in 2022, which indicate a growing mainstream acceptance of impact investing, even in the face of global unrest, inflation, increasing impact of climate change. However, among the more than 1,475 organizations reporting on both their asset under management and their headquarters location, the vast majority are based in Western, Northern, and Southern Europe. That's 45%, and the US and Canada, North America with 34%. Impact investors in emerging markets were more frequently headquartered in Sub-Saharan Africa with 6%, the Middle East and North Africa with only 2%. Investors based in developed markets managed 95% of the sample impact asset under management, while organizations based in emerging markets accounted for only 5% of asset under management. So within the investment space, we have created the so-called 4IP Group Impact Lions Den. So far, we have organized four e-pitching events under the name Impact Lions Den in collaboration with around 50 plus VC funds and more than 50 economic and support organizations that have signed financial service agreements with us. The latest e-pitching event took place around 2 months ago. The next one will take place on the 19th of December, as you saw in the communication that I shared with you earlier today. So who are the impact investors investing in Africa? Some of the largest impact funds in our database are run by managers known primarily for their non-impact strategies. It should be noted that of the top 10 impact fund raised in 2023, 7 were the first fund in a family, if not the first fund from the asset manager. Only 2 had a Roman numeral higher than 3, meaning that they are no longer considered uh, as an emerging fund manager. This is not a space that houses many long-term track records at the fund family level, making diligence more challenging for some. Of the fund managers dedicated to impact investing, some are incredibly targeted, such as Asana Ventures, a Luxembourg-based asset manager focusing on food and agriculture investment, or Generation Investment Management, despite being one of the larger and longest running impact dedicated managers at 44 billion in asset under management. It has a laser focus on climate through investment targeting reduced emission, which can be found in many industries and provide positive outcomes in other impact categories. From the more than 200 investment firms that you saw on the previous slide investing on the African continent, we have reached out to around 70 of those investors to ask them if they would like to be our impact lions or lionesses throughout the series. For impact lions, then we only choose those VC who have expressed an interest in at least one of the solution that's being pitched. So during the second event, we we invited these 5 impact lions and lionesses from the list of impact funds we collaborate with to listen to the pitches by the founders selected from our own database of investment ready and scalable companies which have at least taken the introduction course to the SDG Impact standards as you are doing today. From the third event, we chose the following asset managers, as you can see on a picture. Uh, so, just a second. The second stream of work is the SDG Impact standards, which are looking to strengthen impact practice and embed managing for impact into how the private sector businesses and investors make their decisions in order to deepen impact. The latter work stream is what I'm going to be talking about today. So with a focus on real world application, interactive learning, and a global recognition, our course will equip you with the skills and the knowledge you need to excel in the SDG Impact standards. It's important to emphasize that the course that we are offering is not focusing on sustainability, ESG, or impact reporting, nor is it covering impact measurement theory and techniques in great depth. On the other hand, this course is about embedding sustainability, the SDGs, and managing for impact into the internal management systems and decision-making frameworks to help you operate more sustainably, to help you contribute positively to the SDGs, and to help underpin your business in the future to make it more resilient as well as more successful. So the course will start with some definitions before we get into the data so that we are all thinking about the same concepts in the same way. First of all, note that sustainability and sustainable development are often used interchangeably. We first define and then discuss about sustainability and ask the participants in the room to share your perceptions about the importance and the urgency of sustainability. The SDGs, as you know, are the minimum sustainable development thresholds that all United Nations member states have agreed are needed to assure our common future. The next 10 years will be critical for action. Those organizations that show leadership on the SDGs will be the most likely to win the support of your stakeholders. That includes your potential investors or your existing investors, the regulators in the market where you operate, your consumers, your collaborators, your employees, and of course the society at large, specifically in the local community where your companies are operating. So let's focus on ESG. And as a term, ESG is used differently by different people and therefore can mean everything and can mean nothing. If you look at the investment market globally, the leading use of ESG in the investment market is around financial risk. So it is used as a financial risk tool and as a profit maximizing tool. Typically, it's applied as a financial risk management approach focused on enterprise or portfolio value. What are the ESG factors that could affect the financial performance of your enterprise? How does the world impact your enterprise? What do I do with this information? Or what do you do with this information? And how does this impact your daily decision-making processes? So ESG investment is an investment approach that seeks to incorporate greater and more consistent information regarding material, environmental, social, and corporate governance development, risk and opportunities into asset allocation and risk management decisions so as to generate sustainable long-term financial returns. The explicit and systematic inclusion of material ESG factors in investment analysis and investment decisions, and here we're looking at it from the investment side, are material to the investment performance of the investors that would potentially include you in their portfolio. So moving from ESG to impact, what does that mean? So when we think about the standards and why they have been developed, it has been in response to a gap in the current practice. What we currently are doing is not going to get us to achieve the SDG on a sustainable path on a rate needed to actually achieve the collective SDGs. So when we are looking at the gap between the current practice, which is revolving around the ESG strategies versus impact, there are a few things that are really important to think about and look at. Impact, on the other hand, is trying to think about the changes to aspects of well-being that are experienced by people and planet and that are caused by organizations through its decisions and actions. So rather than focus on your organization's impact on the world or the local community where you operate. And impact can be positive or negative, intended or unintended, or direct and indirect, and vary in terms of how they contribute to the SDGs. Oftentimes, impact is thought about in terms of setting some impact goals, and they in turn lead to the intended impact. But of course, everything has an impact, whether it's positive or negative, intended or unintended. So impact is far more holistic in terms of all of activities and decisions leading to both the intended and unintended impacts. And we need to be thinking about those holistically in terms of assuring that as we manage impact, that we are managing for the net positive impacts while taking into account negative impacts that we may have in other parts of your business or in other aspects of your organization. Sustainability matters to your business, and why now? We need the contribution of the private sector to achieve the SDGs. For the private sector to contribute to sustainability and the SDGs, an external environment is also needed where businesses can continue to strive and survive in the future. For example, more than 50% of the global GDP depends on high functioning biodiversity and ecosystem services. And yet we are experiencing biodiversity loss at an accelerating pace, which only hasten climate change, as I saw also yesterday at a seminar organized by the Club of Rome at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. On this background, we organize our first group exercise, and each group that are convened in in-person two-day training will be given one of the following sets of questions, and the answers to which each group will then synthesize, reflect upon during a 10 minutes breakout session before we convene all of the different groups into the plenary. So, for example, what issues are top of your mind in terms of managing or governing your business right now? Or why do you consider sustainability important? Why now? What is the role of the private sector, or more specifically, your own company, in terms of managing sustainability? And wise. So I think you're all fully aligned with why these questions are very important. What is the business case for sustainability? One example is that the global economy would be 26% bigger if we achieve just gender equality, that is SDG number 5. Another example is that there is an estimated 12 trillion US dollars in business opportunity to unlock solutions to some of our greatest challenges, because sustainability and the SDGs open up new business and investment opportunities, future-proof your businesses from emerging megatrends through resilience, manage risk more effectively, enhance reputation and brand, strengthen social license to operate, keep pace with and anticipate future policy developments, attract and retain the best and the brightest employees, consumers, B2B customers, and investors, strengthen stakeholder relations, um, uh, drive innovation, design effective product and services, develop customer insights, and also stabilize society and markets that underpins your future business performance. So in other words, sustainability is a major business disruptor, just as other macro trends has been in the past. So, second question to the audience would then be, we will then ask, why is valuation of impact important? Again, there will be a breakout session before the different groups will be reconvened in plenary to share your perception on the value and the relative importance. So at the same time, it's important to recognize limitations and traps in valuing impact, the idea of false precision. If there is a limited visibility to the underlying assumptions that underpin valuation, if stakeholders' voices are not included, and so on and so on. You have here, as you can see on the slide, the so-called social value international principle number 3, that value the things that matter, mentions that making decisions about allocating resources between different options require an explicit recognition of the relative value or worth of different changes or outcomes that people experience as a result of activities. Value refers to the relative importance of different outcomes and is subjective in nature. Therefore, it needs to be informed by stakeholders' preferences. So how do we get these values? You get them by asking people how important the outcomes are on a scale from 1 to 10. Ask people which is the least important, and then you assign this a value of 1. And then you ask how many more times important are the other outcomes. Where outcomes are negative, the question is how important is avoiding the negative outcome compared to getting the positive outcomes. And from the data in the table on the slide, do we know how to optimize? Which of the impact A, B, or C do we allocate more resources to? So then we allow the participants attending the training to again take a small pause to think about that, and then they will come up with questions, and then we'll discuss the questions in plenary. Okay, so what are we trying to achieve? The SDG Impact standards require measurement that is useful for decision making. We all recognize that it's never going to be perfect, but as you also know, absolute truth and accuracy doesn't exist and will never be possible. And also it includes negative as well as positive impact, as I just mentioned before. So it is not limited just to measuring progress towards your positive goals. It's also about how do you diminish your negative impact. And based on meaningful stakeholder engagement is really very important. So it should amplify the voices of the people who experience the impact all along the value chain, from if you're in a agribusiness, so we say all the way from the farm to the fork. So external reporting is important but insufficient on its own because it's more backward looking than forward looking. It tends to drive more compliance, form over substance response. It tends to focus on risk more than opportunities. And it's not fast enough to drive change at the pace that we need. And hence, integrating impact data into how your organization, you make your decision, is also important and actually precedes reporting. That's one of the key messages that I would like you to take with you after today's introduction. So we now turn our attention to the SDG impact standards themselves. This very complex diagram really tries to show how the standard works in relation to everything else that exists in the ecosystem. So the idea is not to replicate nor duplicate the good work of other frameworks. So the standards have really been designed as an overarching decision-making framework that helps organizations look at what is available through the resources, the tools, and the frameworks that already exist, and make choices between them, whether it's the ones available today or the ones getting developed in the future. So in the standards themselves, the focus is from end to end. That is, as you can see in the middle of the slide, with the colors, yellow, blue, purple, and kind of Bordeaux color, as you say in French. So so that is, you're moving from strategy through management approach through transparency to corporate governance practices by trying to focus in on the areas that the current high level principles above that, as you can see on the bar, the first bar, that are not focusing on so much. So the gray box in the middle is the standards, and several frameworks are called and are pushed out to, in terms of integrating, for example, as you can see on the box on the left hand side, we have the UN guiding principles for business and human rights, or the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact, the SDGs, as we already talked about, or the impact management project, shared norms, and so on. Then here basically you see the sustainability frameworks. On the x-axis, we have organized the sustainability frameworks according to: one, the principles of practice; two, management or decision-making frameworks, as the one that we are talking about today, as you can see in the second column and the first row. That's where you have the SDG Impact. Third, you have the metrics and taxonomies. Fourth column is the reporting, and the last column is benchmarking data, index, and rating providers. And then on the y-axis, uh, illustrate that some of these sustainability frameworks are more focused on social and environmental returns, whereas others are more focused on financial returns. And I only discuss this at length and provide example of these frameworks during the real 2 to 3 day training, due to the time constraint that we are suffering from today. So here you have the SDG Impact Standards for enterprises. So the entry point to those standards was organized, or is organized, around 12 action for the enterprise standards, but it's also equally, you have similar 12 actions for a private equity fund manager, or even for bond issuers. We are looking at the enterprises today, as you know. So there is now a diagram around this that organizes the standards and practice indicators around these 12 actions. A self-assessment tool around these 12 actions and the assurance framework is also organized around these 12 actions. Those 12 actions are organized around the four main end-to-end themes that I mentioned just before. That is strategy, as you can see in a column on the right-hand side, strategy, management approach, transparency, and corporate governance. So that when we look at the 12 action, what we are seeing here is, number one, to start with that commitment and the changing mindset, where embedding and thinking about sustainability and the SDGs, and where making the positive contribution to the SDG at a high level in terms of purpose of your organization. All of you, since you have all submitted an application for the Earthshot Prize, have already passed the first hurdle, so to speak, or the first step in this diagram. Then the second step is that you think more broadly about sustainability context to identify the areas that are important and where your organization can make the biggest impact. And as you also recall from the questionnaire you had to fill out for the application, this is fully aligned with that. So that is really taking the existing materiality assessment that a lot of organizations do and making sure that it is taking a somewhat broader view and looking around corners, which can be positive, both from the perspective of anticipating future risk earlier, but also in terms of identifying pivot opportunities and opportunities for innovation, to lean into these trends. Then number three, backing this up with setting ambitious goals. So that's number four, in line with and reflecting what has been learned through the previous step one and two that we just went through, and integrated, and that's step number three, into purpose and strategy of your organization. And then you adjust your strategy and your goal as needed in order to optimize the impact. The remaining steps will be presented during the actual 2 days course, again because of time constraints. Here you have the SDG Impact Self-Assessment Tool, which help you prioritize actions and prepare assurance. So let me just quickly show you what this looks like. So here you have it. So you have this Excel sheet. As I mentioned before, this is a self-assessment, which is organized along the same 12 actions. So first you have the strategy, and within strategy, as mentioned, you have number one, commit to operating sustainably and making a positive contribution. Then you have questions such as how does your enterprise link its approach to creating long-term value for the enterprise with contributing positively to sustainable development and the SDGs? Um, then you move on. What is the current approach for this action? Um, and here, what is missing? So you do a gap analysis from the current approach and the SDG Impact standards. Here you had what can be done to improve the practice, and then you have the self-assessment. Is overall, how would you respond to questions in the column D, as we saw before? And there's a drop down menu, so you can answer either you say yes, in progress, or no, but plans to do, or other, or needs clarification. Then you have the, in terms of easiness, how easy is it to implement? And here you have four categories: easy, neutral, difficult, I do not know. And then you have the value added. So how much value or benefit would your organization obtain by implementing this? Again, you have a drop down menu, which is high, medium, low, I don't know. The value added scores, as you saw here. And then suggested prioritization, so you can rank automatically. So will be an automatic ranking coming here on this cell. And here you can provide evidence. You can upload documents to really put so that this self-assessment is just not coming out of your head, but is actually based upon evidence documents that you can share with the self-assessment. And you can also provide comments and notes. And again, do you use any tools or methodology standards or other for applying this practice indicators? What are some of the challenges, suggestions? Do you have any other comments? And this continues all the way down through, as you can see, the 12 actions with the same kind of questions. Okay. Yeah, so let's go back to the slide. I wonder, did you see all of the Excel? I hope that was, you saw that on on my slide. If not, okay. Then we move on to the case study. So how do you actually apply the standards in the self-assessment tool to a case study, which is called Seed and Co. Um, so basically, we introduce this case study. We'll use it's a hypothetical case study exploring some typical impact management decision making at the enterprise level. It's a case study, it's fictional, but it's still based on a real life scenario from a company that was operating in West Africa. So, and then here you have number 7. So 7 is step number 7 in the diagram, the framework that I showed you before, which is about how do you develop an impact measurement and management system framework, where you have the following 11 questions. So firstly, you have what are the sustainability risk and opportunities? These are the impact goals. What are the solutions? These are your actions of your company. What are the resources required to allow you to implement those activities? And then you have the so-called measurement questions: the who, the what, the how much, the duration, the contribution, and the value. Um, as you can see, these are how these questions appear on the so-called logical framework, where you have input, activities, output, outcomes, and impacts and value. And then you have the questions: what impacts are most material? And that means relevant and significant in terms of contributing positive to sustainable development. And what are the risks that the impact might not be achieved as expected? What are the consequences to those experiencing the risk if impact are different from what was actually expected. Okay, this slide shows that the social value international standard, which is compatible with the impact management project's dimensions, the 5 dimensions, the who, the what, and so on. Um, so the request that an appropriate sample of people are involved in order to better identify the who, help you define the what outcomes, and measure the how much change, and help you establish the actual value. So basically, one of the key takeaways from the training is, of course, that more data, more insight. The more data you have, the more insight you have, the more options you also will have. So by answering all of the 10 impact questions, it can seem very overwhelming at once if you haven't done this before. But each data point will actually help you to understand your impact much better, and it'll give you more options for optimizing impact, and of course help you make much better decisions at the end of the day. Um, sorry. Okay. And also, the seed and co are basically quantifying each impact with collected data collected directly from their stakeholders. There are different ways to collect data. One way is to use surveys, and the numerical data will then help represent the amount of change caused by this company's action. It will help you estimate the importance of change, that's the value, as expressed by the stakeholders along the value chain. And much of the data, as you know, particularly if you do a survey, is of course going to be subjective data. But the message again is that no data, some data, however subjective it might be, is fine, because some aspects of well-being are very subjective. Um, so a key point is that data is better than no data, and the process of involving stakeholder builds accountability, and data can maximize value for each stakeholder group. Other key points are that most decisions are being made right now with no impact data. Having some data and knowing its limitation is the very first step in the right direction. And one way to improve the comparability of impact data across your stakeholder group is to use money as a proxy for value of changes in well-being. It's not perfect, but as you know, there's no perfect science for valuation. Another key points are that business make decisions with low rigor data all of the time. Managing risk required data with appropriate rigor to inform each decision. The SDG Impact Standard is a decision-making framework which allows for different levels of rigor, and the external stakeholders may want to see the data that supports decisions. In this instance, there should be transparency of the data that you're using, and transparency of the risk and limitation of the data that you're using. And in order to get a better understanding of that, we will recommend the participants of our training workshop to do a deep dive in Social Value International's um, brochure called Standard on Applying Principle 8, Be Responsible by Social Value International. Then lastly, about the independent assurance. So you have the so-called standard voluntary independent use. So the standards are designed to be used as a best practice guide. You've seen the self-assessment tool, which can also be used to undertake the gap analysis, as I showed you on the Excel sheet, and as a guide to prioritize actions, fill gaps, and improve practice over time. So an external assurance framework and the so-called SDG Impact seal that you will get is really developed to support the adoption of the SDG Impact standards. The assurance will be done by third-party accredited assurers. So that means that after you have received your certification, which is a signal to the outside world that you're fully committed to sustainability, sustainable development, the SDG goals, uh, if you want to keep the SDG Impact Standards seal, you will have to subject yourself to an independent evaluation done by independent consultants that will come and visit you. Uh, usually it will be every second year. That gives credibility, not that anyone is trusting your own self-assessment, but in order to give even more weight to the data and valuation coming out of this exercise, it's important, just as is important with the financial assurance and financial reporting, that non-financial reporting is also being undertaken by independent uh, assurers. So the the requirements to get the SDG Impact Seal should satisfy the requirement of the United Nations Development Policy on due diligence and partnership, with the private sectors having to meet a minimum evidence requirement and commit and demonstrate continuous improvement. Um, and we believe that the SDG Impact Standard is a great bulwark against the increasing amount of greenwashing that has affected the impact investing industry as we move from a nascent industry towards becoming mainstream, with all of the big players, the big asset managers, the private banks, and so on, institutional investors getting on board with impact investing, setting up their own funds. So it's really important, uh, which makes the SDG Impact Standard even more important moving forward, and will have more value both for the companies but also for your future investors. Um, yeah, so with that, I would like to thank you for your attention today. If you have any questions, we'll be very happy to answer the questions that you might have. And I can see we have more people who came. So I hope that most of you heard most of the introduction. But should you have any questions, we have 10 minutes for Q&A. Feel free to ask any questions that might help persuade you, hopefully, to join one of our future in-person, or at sometimes we also organize in-person trainings. But I think, of course, uh, the framework works better when we actually have an opportunity to be in the same room, where we can have breakouts and between the different participants attending the training.
Hello,
Yeah, Olivia, go ahead.
Christian. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question concerning the trainings. I'm really interested in what you have just shared, and I wanted to know more about maybe the timelines and the procedure for even joining the trainings and how that works out for those that are interested.
Yeah. Um, there are different ways. For AP Group, we also do a lot of consultancy. At the moment, for example, I'm doing a big consultancy for the European Commission on the Global Gateway, which has allowed me to travel for several times to 5 Central African countries. And so when I go on these consultancy missions, if time permits, I will extend my stay in the country so that I, for example, can do a 2 days in-person training in that particular country where I so happen to be. The same thing, for example, earlier this year, we had the Zambia Impact Investing Summit. It didn't work out this time, but the idea was actually that the United Nations Development Program would invite me to come and do a 2 day training leading up to the summit for some of the companies that had been shortlisted by United Nations and some of the other organizers of the Impact Summit to pitch at that event, to really get them fully on board with the SDG Impact Standards. As you remember, there were two work streams. There was the SDG investor maps, which works closely with the SDG Impact Standards. What we are doing on our side, as you can see with the event taking place the 19th of December, is that we organize our own e-pitching events, which we call the SDG, the Impact Lines then. But that approach is kind of aligned with what the UNDP is doing on their side. And we are also in a position to help the UNDP uh, source companies that can be uploaded. You remember the slide I showed you with the investment opportunity areas. So
Mm-hmm.
once you reach a certain scale, your companies, since you have already, I would say most of you, or if you have been certified, that will give you a great chance to have your solutions uploaded on the UNDP's database, the SDG investor maps, which are being widely used by investors around the world who are thinking about, for example, investing in Uganda or investing in Kenya or investing in Zimbabwe. So that should be an added incentive to get that certification, so you can get your solution out to more potential investors.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, maybe while you're thinking about another question. So I think most of you, as I can see the names, you have been invited to participate at our e-pitching event on Thursday, the 19th of December at 5 o'clock Central European Time. My colleague Yang Su, who's with us, he will follow up with you tomorrow. We will need some information in order to put together a pitch book, which will be shared with the 70 plus impact investors in our database that we are working with within the Impact Alliance then. But in order to incentivize the impact investors to actually show up, and we need 3 of them to be there, so there will be 3 to 5 investors in the room. So in order to incentivize them to be there, they need, of course, to have a minimum amount of information. So we'll need to know what are the deal amount that you're looking for, what is your ask, what type of investment are you looking for? Are you looking for private debt? Are you looking for private equity, convertible bonds, uh, other types of financial instruments? What is the valuation of your company? And then most importantly, we need a one-page teaser, and ideally also if you have an image or a photo of your product or your solution, so that we can compile all of that into our pitch book. The pitch book will be shared with the investors early next week, so that we have enough lead time leading up to the e-pitching session to make sure that we actually have investors in a room that has an interest in at least in one of the 7 or maximum 8 solutions that will be pitching for those investors. So we only have maximum 8 slots. So we have invited a bit more. So we also have someone to choose from. To be perfectly honest, one of our selection criteria is also the ask, because we know from the investor side that they are looking, because of the transaction costs associated with doing due diligence for companies that are uh, not at the concept stage, but has leads been deploying for, let's say, for to give the investors enough reassurance about in which direction the company is going, in addition to, of course, having understanding of what your solution is all about and the scalability. So please do provide my colleague Mr. Su about with this information, ideally by end of business tomorrow, so that we can put together the pitch book and share with all of the investors next week, so you will have a greater chance of pitching in front of investors uh, on the 19th of December. Okay, do you have any questions about the SDG Impact Standards, the training itself, or the event on the 19th of December? If you don't have any questions now, feel free to reach out to Mr. Su by email. He's was on CC on all of the emails that you received the last few days by either myself or my colleague, Mr. Peterson. Um, don't, if you don't have any questions right now. Yeah. Yeah. I think that was a little bit what I alluded to before. So as I said, you will have an opportunity to pitch no- at our series called Impact Alliance then, which takes place every 2 months. In addition to that, in between those online sessions, we have, and in addition to the 70 what we call impact lines, we also have a database, as you saw during my presentation, covering all of the impact fund managers or asset managers investing in Africa. So we also compile a second pitch book, which includes all of the companies that has been pitching at our impact lines session, or what we used to call the Impact Investor Circle e-pitching session, which has been running for the last almost 4 years. So these 70, almost 80 companies are compiling our pitch book, and we share that with all of the investors that we have in our database. So even for those of you who might not get a chance to pitch on the 19th of December, there will be another opportunity 2 months later on. Plus, if your solution and the three criteria, as I mentioned before, is aligned with what we are looking for, then we'll include you in the database and we'll put you in the pitch book, and we'll share that with the investors that we have in the database. And in addition to that, as I mentioned, for those of you who get an opportunity to be certified by attending the SDG Impact Standards training, the 2-day training, that certification normally should qualify you to also have an opportunity to have your solutions on the UNDP's uh, investor investor maps, online investor maps, which, as I mentioned, are being used by investors across the world to look for investment opportunities. Any other questions? Last burning question before we close. Okay, if that is not the case, I would like to thank you all for having participated today. I hope that,
Um,
yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, Paul, go ahead.
Sorry. I wanted to ask the pitching. Will it be paid? Are we going to pay for it, or you guys will take care of the payment, like to attend the pitching?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Paul. Good question. As I said, it's an
Yes.
online, so it's not like going to an investment conference where you sometimes have to pay in order to
Okay.
get a chance to pitch. So it's free of charge. As I said,
Okay.
the only condition at this stage, it might change in the future, but the only condition at this stage is that you attend the SCT Impact Standards introduction. So having attended today's introduction, you are already eligible and qualified to be pitching at either on the 19th or future events if you're not ready to pitch. You will receive instruction as to how the actual pitching takes place, what we would like you to put forward in terms of the canvas. You will have only 3 minutes to pitch, and there will be 5 minutes of Q&A where the 5 investors will have opportunity to ask one round of question. That investor that might have an interest in your solution will then get a second round to ask an additional follow-up question. So that's how it works. There will be 7, maximum 8 founders pitching. Each founder has 3 minutes, after which the 5 investors have an opportunity to ask one question, and then there will be a follow up. You do not have to stay throughout the 1 hour. The e pitching event takes 1 hour. After you have finished pitching, you're welcome to leave the meeting, but you're also welcome to stay on to listen to the other ones. You can always learn a lot by listening to how other founders come across and how they sell themselves. So that is really up to yourself how busy you are on the 19th of December. I hope I asked your question, Mr. Kamara.
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Okay.